and then we...
I'm in the research department, so my mandate is partly research. And so there are a couple of papers, and I also draw on the wider literature on these issues. So the first question, why is the monetary policy in advanced economies of significance to emerging markets? For two reasons. So there are two cycles to a monetary policy in a country such as the US. There is a part of the cycle when the policy is expansionary. And that expansionary phase of the cycle creates capital surges. When there is excess liquidity in advanced economies, which goes into the global financial market looking for better yields, it ends up finding its way into emerging markets, which results in complex macroeconomic challenges in emerging markets. Excess liquidity looking for quick yields fuels asset price bubbles, results in appreciation of real exchange rate, loss of competitiveness, worsening current account deficit, and so on. Along the way, credit growth is fast, lending standards are lowered, which means that the quality of lending is impaired as well. So there is a surge phenomenon, which looks good when the capital is flowing into an emerging market. Usually economies grow faster, credit is cheap, and nobody realizes that it can be a potential issue down the road when the capital reverses. So when the reversal phase comes, there is at times a non-linear reversal of everything that we see in the first phase, right? Asset prices correct, there is financial disruption, current account deficit has to correct as well as a part of the adjustment mechanism. And when current account deficit actually gets adjusted, it's investment which particularly suffers. And as I said, these impacts can be non-linear, and can have wider implications for the real economy than the benefits that were reaped during the phase of surge. And therefore, emerging markets, only a subset of emerging markets complain during each phase of the cycle. Brazil was notable in complaining when the capital was flowing in because of the monetary policy in the US, but other emerging markets unfortunately only complain during the second phase of the cycle, which is when it comes to retrenchment of monetary policy. So how has the monetary policy in advanced economies behaved in recent years, and how it may evolve going forward? As you would know, it has been unprecedented loose in some of the largest advanced economies in the world. Euro area, Japan, UK, US, they all have reduced their policy interest rates close to zero. And on top of that, they have also expanded their balance sheets. So the central banks have expanded their balance sheets. US has been the one with the largest expansion, and it has also the largest balance sheet currently among the advanced world. So it has been something unprecedented. But going forward, the outlook is actually diverse across advanced economies. Not all economies are doing well. US seems to be faring better than the other countries and is likely to start tightening, increasing its policy rate sometime soon. But UK, Euro area, and Japan are likely to hold on to their policy for at least a year, if not longer. So what does it all boil down to? We have US, which is on the cusp of raising its interest rates, but other countries remain accommodative. So what I have seen in some of these phenomena is that when it comes to the implications of monetary policy for emerging markets, US happens to be the most relevant country. Reason being, first, it's the largest in terms of its balance sheet and the capital that has gone out. And outside of Europe, emerging markets receive a large chunk of their capital from US. So even if the monetary policy in Japan and UK matters, but in terms of just the magnitude and where the capital flows in to a wider set of emerging markets, US is the most important country. And therefore, the development that we are looking into is really quite relevant. Now, this is the question that would be addressed perhaps in 3 days from now. Would the US raise its interest rate soon? My guess is as good as anybody else. It may not, right? The point I want to make it's not perhaps going to be a very momentous decision, even if it raises its interest rates by 25 basis points this week. The reason being twofold. First, it's an event which is almost fully anticipated and perhaps already internalized by the markets. Second, a bigger point is how is this policy going to evolve in the next 2 years or so, right? So first is it starts tightening its cycle, increases incrementally by 25 basis points either this month or in a couple of months, but it is widely expected by FOMC members that once this cycle turns around, it will complete its entire cycle of returning to 300 basis points within a matter of 2 years. And this latter tightening over a prolonged period, according to me, is a more significant development than the first incremental increase of 25 basis points. So therefore, for that reason, emerging markets need to prepare themselves not so much for the volatility that might come around first time this cycle turns, but also what will happen in the 2 years following that. So we are talking about at least 8 or 10 tightening cycles depending on the pace of increase. And in terms of trying to predict how this initial tightening and eventual tightening over a period of 2 years might affect emerging markets, the tapering event gives some sign of what might come ahead. Remember, the tapering event started in May 2013, and there were 2 distinct parts to that event. One was the tapering talk. When nothing happened, it was just that the Fed chairman raised the possibility that they may start tightening the policy. And then there was an actual tapering event when policy was tightened de facto. It was the first event which was unanticipated, when nothing actually happened on the ground, which created most of the market reaction. And when tapering actually came around, it was a non-event. So in my view, that's the kind of reaction we might be looking to when the first tightening happens. Yes, some of the G20 countries were among the most affected when the tapering talk happened. And to that extent, G20 emerging markets remain vulnerable to the broader monetary policy in the US and elsewhere. So I have divided in my presentation the impact of the liftoff into 2 parts. One is this initial part of capital reversal and volatility. And here I'm taking the view that to the extent it's anticipated, exchange rates have already corrected, equity prices are now low, and capital has already flown out. The initial increase in interest rate might be small, as well as the impact on markets may be small. And there is some heterogeneity across countries. There are other global events of equal magnitude in terms of the impact on emerging markets happening currently, those being the decline in oil and commodity prices, as well as the slowdown in China. So to the extent that some countries are affected by more than one of these shocks, those countries are likely to be affected more. And incidentally, India seems in a strong position from that perspective, it being an importer of commodities and oil and having relatively weak links with China. But the second part of this impact, which is the medium-term cost of financing, seems to be the more relevant impact to me. Preparing for a 300 or larger increase in the cost of financing for emerging markets, I think is likely to be a bit disruptive. And for that, the only solution is for emerging markets to prepare for it through wider structural reforms, including in their financial sectors, so that to the extent that there is space for competitive gains, there they can perhaps modulate this increase in cost of financing by reaping those gains. And this is the last part of my presentation, synchronizing monetary policy globally, and is there a theoretical basis for that? So reading the literature, it seems to me that it is unclear theoretically whether there are gains to be made by coordinating monetary policy. And I'm not going into it, but what I'm going into now is the practical issues which can guide whether synchronizing monetary policy is even a viable idea. And here I have listed a list of questions that come to my mind when I think about synchronizing monetary policy. First of all, coordination for who all? Should the policy be coordinating within the larger advanced economies. Each one of them have their own business cycles, and of course their business cycles are not aligned. Or advanced economies as a block versus emerging markets, and that does not look like a very appealing idea as well. And when I think about synchronization, what about synchronizing, between larger emerging markets and their smaller neighboring nations? So what I had in mind was, the Indian monetary policy impacts what happens in Nepal. So are we talking about really coordination at a larger scale or only within G20? And if it's only within G20, will it have the right legitimacy? And the frequency of this discussion, right? I mean, monetary policy is one policy which has a very high frequency turnaround. Most countries decide on their monetary policies in a 6 to 8 week cycle. So at what frequency do we want these discussions, if at all, to be a part of the G20 discussions? And at what part of the cycle do we want these to happen? In business as usual scenario, when monetary policy is being expansionary, or when it's being contractionary? So looking at all of these practical aspects, actually, it seems to me that synchronization is not likely to go very far. But what else can then the emerging markets do to handle the volatility that they experience because of global factors, including monetary policy? So first, actually, before that, what can emerging market do? Abhik, I just have 2 slides, so just be a little bit patient. So as a second best, can advanced economies do something else? So I just said, and I took the view that synchronization does not look like a viable option, but is there something else they can do? And on that, actually, others have written about it, including Rakesh Mohan, Raghuram Rajan, my co-author Barry Igon Green, and others. And their suggestions vary between offering more clearer and frequent forward guidance to emerging markets, offering wider swap lines, and some progress actually on this has already been made. According to me, the fact that Fed has waited this long in tightening its monetary policies because of the impact it has internalized in its decisions on emerging markets, and I don't think it will go further than this on this issue. There is perhaps some role for multilateral organizations as well, though I'm not very optimistic about that as well, given that historically these arrangements have not gone very far. So I think the buck stops actually with emerging markets. They have to prepare themselves to brace the impact of surges and stops better. And the policy list that I have here is something that is known to most macroeconomists. They have to calibrate the pace of inflows and the type of flows better, knowing very well that whenever capital flows in at a very rapid pace, eventually it reverses as well. They have to use stronger macroprudentials. They have to build their buffers, including reserve buffers. And ultimately, in today's world where there is a whole lot of financial integrations, they just have to accept wider exchange rate volatility as a part of the game. They have to perhaps encourage more hedging, which is being done in India, and make sure that there are not large balance sheet mismatches. Besides that, I think I don't think there is much scope for either monetary policy coordination or looking for second best solutions from advanced economies. I'll stop there.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Poonam, both for stopping and also for giving us a flavor of the various issues involved in this and going into some of the nuances like local coordination that are strictly outside the sort of ambit of the discussion that I have at least read on G20 coordination. I'd like to give Herbert a chance next. He will bring us hopefully an European flavor, and the Europeans have been far more reluctant than the Fed to do these unconventional monetary things. So perhaps if you could sort of talk a little bit about Europe's attitude towards this, to this issue, and perhaps respond to some of the issues that Poonam has raised. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me back to Delhi. I have been here last year in a completely different environment. Germany had just won the World Cup. We were happy. Things were moving at a nice pace. This year, as you are probably all aware, we have big turmoil in Europe. In Germany, we will have more refugees than babies, which is a first. Last week, an English political scientist has said that Germany has been turned into a country of hippies that have lost their brains. I don't comment any further, but you realize things are really kind of heated up in Europe, and we're struggling to find a solution. Monetary policy, in contrast, seems to be an easy one compared to the problems that we are facing at the moment. Of course, we will probably have a quite interesting week in finance. Whether or not the Fed will tighten, the question is whether they want to delay it much further. In my presentation, and I'm aware of the fact that 15 minutes is the maximum, I will try to look at 3 issues from a European. I have 12 minutes left. I will look at monetary policy from, I dare say, a German perspective, because as you are well aware, perceptions and opinions on monetary policy in Europe differ. I will look at the effects of normalization, which I call normalization, of monetary policy. And I will ask the question whether the large G20 countries will be willing to cooperate on monetary policy. Of course, in Germany, the impatience with the existing monetary policy is rising and is great. We are not very happy. Many are not very happy with it. Many observers in Germany ask, where is all that liquidity going? We probably don't know exactly where it's going, but we know there is a lot of liquidity out there. And the question we are asking ourselves is the damage done by so much liquidity greater than the benefit from that QE, from that ultra-loose monetary policy? And of course, this is a political economy question. Who is benefiting from that ultra-loose monetary policy? Because it is an illusion to assume that all members of society are benefiting equally. What we do see is asset price inflation, and the Bank for International Settlement has been issuing a stern warning on the long-term effects of